It's about moving people. So by creating spaces where we can get more efficient modes of transport like cycling, hopefully it will allow people to sort of travel a little bit more freely and reduce the traffic congestion, particularly if they're switching away from car onto cycling modes.
That was Senior Transport Planner Rob Hayward, and you're listening to the Bailiwick Podcast with me, David Conway. Last week it was proposed to change the road between Georgetown and Don Road to include both a contraflow cycle lane and a with-flow lane in the opposite direction, as well as closing the Howard Davis Park slip road. The proposal, which is now out for public consultation, comes as part of an effort to increase cycle links between the east of the island and town, and encourage islanders to switch to more sustainable modes of transport. Indeed, looking at the recent UK statistics, it seems there has been a national move towards more cycling over the past year, with a survey from Cycle Scheme finding that 53% of respondents who were cyclists had cycled more since the beginning of lockdown. Returning to more local lanes, Rob Hayward joins me in the studio to discuss the proposed Georgetown to Don Road development he's helped spearhead, and what the future holds for sustainable transport in the island. So first off, I just wanted to get a broad outline from you about why you think it's so important for the island to create more cycle-friendly areas.
Well, if we create more cycle-friendly areas, it kind of furthers the government's ambitions around sustainable transport and what's reflected in the sustainable transport policy. So if we create more cycle-friendly areas, the idea being that more people will cycle and we'll generally see more sustainable transport sort of impetus in our transport network, which is a good thing.
And can you talk a bit about that broader picture? Give me a breakdown of what you have in mind. Obviously, the new Georgetown Don Road development is only a small part of a much wider jigsaw puzzle. If you could just explain what that puzzle is.
Sure. I mean, how long have you got? It's quite a complex picture, I suppose. But we really sort of take it at the moment from the position of sort of looking at things through climate change and sustainability in general. So What we're trying to do is obviously try and decarbonise our transport system as much as we can with this sort of drive around going carbon neutral. So shifting people onto cycling, walking in particular, that generally is a very carbon sort of neutral way of travelling around. So the more people we can get to do that, the better. It's obviously got a lot of other benefits as well, with people being more active and sort of healthier as well. And it's very good for people's sort of mental and physical well-being, that sort of walking and cycling thing. So it's all good stuff.
In terms of what you've done already, obviously the most recent one that's probably fresh in people's minds is the contraflow lane that's from Halkett Place to Hill Street, which I think was launched in June. Can I just ask how that trial's gone so far and what's been the feedback from the public on it?
Yeah, so it's a trial for 12 months. There is a sort of set of follow-up measures sort of being identified, or they've been identified, I should say, to really appraise the scheme. It's going to, like I said, it's going to be in for 12 months. So initially, the first thing is to do is get the scheme in, allow the travel patterns to settle down, because normally when you put something in new, fresh for the first time, people are a little bit curious as to how it works. They use it in different ways. You'll find that there'll be some people that maybe sort of didn't expect the cycle lane to be there, although we did consult quite heavily on it. So, I mean, it'll probably catch a few people off guard. So once the travel patterns are settled down, we'll begin the appraisal process really to sort of consult with members of the public and see how it's going. That'll include things like counts as well, to look at the number of users and generally seek feedback from cycling groups as well as to how it works.
Talking about how you choose these areas, obviously it's been different areas of town, sometimes quite far apart. What is the motivation and the thought process behind the areas you do pick?
So we've actually got work in progress to identify, the government's calling it an active travel plan. I think that's the working title for it, but it's pretty close to what it'll be, which will actually set out this strategic vision in terms of what we're going to do with regards to identifying the routes around town. So it'll be something that's generally sort of master planned and consulted on, and it'll look at where all the routes could go around town in general. Historically, though, we've come from slightly a point of using our engineering judgment and transport planning knowledge, looking at data as to where people want to cycle, trying to work out where there's missing links. Half the team, or most of the team, I should say, are probably keen cyclists themselves. So as users, we kind of know on the network where there are gaps or deficiencies, we get people writing in, there's letters. Ministers also sort of ask us to look at areas that they know are concerns from where they've had issues fed back from their constituents. So there's a whole raft and array and way in which we get this feedback to try and sort of identify future projects. But like I said, going forward, once we've got the active travel plan complete, we'll have that big picture, and hopefully everyone will be able to sort of see what's coming, basically.
Sure, and you spoke a bit about data there. What has been the data? What's that told you overall so far about the networks in town and more broadly on the island?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of cycle counters that are down principally on the cycle route along the south coast. So we've got one near the Lookout Cafe and there's one at Half Day Par. They count the cyclists 365 days of the year. So we've got a really good idea of how seasonal flows in sort of cycling can change. Unsurprisingly, lots of people get on the bike in these nice, warm, mild, sunny months. It's a nice, pleasant way to travel. Not so much when it's absolutely throwing it down in January. So we can see how it changes, and it's actually quite interesting looking at the data because it does vary immensely. You just have to look at whether the day was raining or whether it was sunny, and it's quite a dramatic difference in the number of people that are sort of walking and cycling, or cycling in particular, I should say. But we've also got other sources of data we look at. So we've got Strava data. We actually sort of have the data fed back to us from companies like that. So for, I guess, those of you that don't know what Strava is, I should probably elaborate. It's an app that people use when riding their bike to record their journeys. So we get the information that comes back from Strava to let us know basically where people are cycling and where they want to cycle. So we try and match up that supply with the demand in terms of where they're traveling to and from.
And where are those cycling hotspots so far?
It's mostly along the south coast. You'll probably be unsurprised to hear. We've got the decent cycle track running along St Albans Bay. There's incredible numbers of cyclists going along there, like tens of thousands a month. And through the Half Day Par cycle counter. And then crucially, what it allows you to kind of do is overlay the information on a map. So you build up like heat lines in terms of where the most cyclists are using, so you can see like where there's hot spots, and then you can kind of go back and review the area and just say, look, are we actually providing for cyclists in these areas? Are there barriers to making it easier for cyclists to permeate through these areas, and what can we do about it?
Moving more specifically onto this Georgetown to Don Road development, obviously it's going to make things easier for cyclists, but in terms of traffic, obviously you're turning this into a single lane road. Are there going to be risks that instead of reducing car use in town, it could actually simply clog up roads with traffic up Montmilley, up around town, and make car use more prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, that's a frequent concern whenever we're sort of looking at reallocating road space and sort of increasing facilities for cyclists. We've got a fixed amount of space in Jersey's roads. So to actually sort of turn some of it away from car use to cycling use is always going to have that tension. The idea being that if you start to reallocate road space towards cycling modes, you can actually get a lot more people down a particular stretch of tarmac at any given time. A bike takes up physically a whole lot less space than a car, an SUV, or even like a large van sort of thing. So some of the bigger forms of transport. So it's about moving people. So by creating spaces where we can get more efficient modes of transport like cycling, hopefully it will allow people to sort of travel a little bit more freely and reduce the traffic congestion, particularly if they're switching away from car onto cycling modes.
I suppose the fear is people don't switch, and that it only supplies the current cyclists. Are there other ways that you've thought about trying to address that as well, trying to encourage people to do the switch?
Yeah, so I mean, just transport in general is a big puzzle, I suppose. So cycling is just one form of it. There are other forms. So, walking and travel by public transport, so Liberty Bus, are part of the mix as well. So if people can travel as well by bus or by walking, then that's also a more efficient way to sort of move more people around the network. So that's just one element to it, really.
Another area of the development, which is going to be quite significant, the Howard Davis Park slip road is going to be shut. Can you explain the reasoning behind that?
So the reason for that one is we've looked at the traffic data at the moment in terms of the vehicles that are making that right turn, and it's very, very small numbers relative to the traffic that's going through the junction. So we've built a junction model that will allow us to essentially work out whether this will cause a problem for the traffic in general before we actually go ahead and do it. So we look at the numbers, look at the anticipated increases or sort of changes to overall delay and queuing. work out whether that's an acceptable number versus, the advantage it gains for cyclists. And these things are done on a balance, really. So if there's any sort of change overall, then, you've got to weigh it up against the improvements of the increase of like sort of amenity and journey time, sort of reliability that you're introducing for cyclists, and safety as well, of course.
And can you talk about how that will benefit cyclists as well?
By taking out the right turn lane and creating a sort of space where people can walk and cycle there instead, that actually allows a lot more scope to how we design up any future junction. So it suddenly makes available sort of additional width that you could use for a cycle lane, or you can make the pavement wider, so it's more of a sort of safe environment for pedestrians, because that's one of the sort of things we get fed back to us. A lot of Jersey's pavements are very kind of titchy in terms of the overall width, so you often find yourself walking along the gutter next to sort of puddles where cars are splashing you because it's so narrow. So if we can create those sort of wide and open areas where people feel safe, there's space for people to move around, then it just adds to the overall sort of walking amenity experience kind of thing, and you're going to be more inclined to do it because it's a more attractive sort of way of travelling, really.
As well as cars, there's obviously quite heavy bus usage. There's bus stops along that road. How are they going to be factored into this new development?
So the bus stops aren't moving. The bus stops will still be there. The final design is yet to be really sort of thrashed out, because at the moment we're going through a public consultation phase to really get the feedback from people in terms of, what they see as the concerns. So, we tilt to Liberty Bus as well. They've obviously expressed a wish to us to keep the bus stops there. They're well used, well loved. So, we're going to incorporate into the proposals as best we can, to make sure that the bus can still set down and pick up people safely. So, that could be, weights in the traffic. It could be that you create a little cutout for the bus to pull into using some of the available space. There's different ways of looking at it. And until we've sort of done that public consultation work, we won't really know what the best solution is.
And in terms of the road being an artery in general between town and the east, for larger vehicles and emergency vehicles like ambulances, how will they be factored into the plans, and how will they be given special provisions to ensure that their flow continues as normal?
Yes, I mean, we'll consult with the ambulances and the emergency services in general as to their needs. Anecdotally, from when I've spoken to police officers, they put the blue lights on and everyone just parts like the Red Sea. It's quite a sort of powerful way for the police to actually sort of get through the traffic sort of thing. So if enough people kind of switch modes onto cycling, and we encourage that cycling culture, then overall we're hoping the traffic levels of congestion will be roughly the same. It's one of those things as well that it balances itself out. So if the traffic congestion levels reach an unacceptable level, you see people changing how they travel. You've probably done it yourself, where you thought, traffic's hell today, I won't bother travelling, or I'll travel later, or maybe I'll catch the bus because it takes the same amount of time. There's different responses that we get as individuals that sort of mean that overall we don't see generally situations where it's impossible to move from one part of the island to the other. It might take quite a long time at times, but overall it finds a level where people kind of travel and find it what they're willing to do.
And in terms of safety as well, with this continued traffic on the streets now intermingling with cyclists, 2 lanes of cyclists, how will safety measures be incorporated?
So any design goes through what's called a road safety audit process. That occurs at various stages throughout the design. So there's the early stages when it's being sort of designed on paper, 2-dimensional design sort of thing. And then once the scheme's actually built, it goes through another road safety audit process. And that's where a qualified road safety auditor will go out actually on the site and identify issues. And then it will be up to the designers, i.e. the government, to respond. I should just say that the road safety auditor is completely independent. So, he will criticise, or she will criticise our work, let us know where there's safety issues or things that we've missed. And then it'll be up to us to sort of address those. In terms of like safety for the cyclists, obviously what we're trying to do is create an environment that's as safe as possible for people to cycle, so that as well acts as a powerful means of encouraging them to sort of take to the mode, because that's one of the sort of common sort of feedbacks that we get, that people find cycling at times it can be quite threatening because of the traffic around you sort of thing. So if we create safe spaces for cycling, then it just adds to the mix that, it's a safe mode of travel.
Yeah, because you've got the bollards there already. What are some of the provisions that you could see being put in place as well as the bollards?
You can use your imagination, I suppose. Look at cycle lanes from anywhere else, be it in the Netherlands, Copenhagen, London's got quite an extensive cycle network with the cycle superhighways they're putting in. Even down to some of the more modest cycleways that we've got, here within Jersey. So the Railway Walk being a fine example. It's quite an urban area adjacent to the park there. It's a tarmacked road. It's not the countryside. So we'd probably try to make sure that anything we put in was complementary with the townscape and streetscape, so that it sort of, ultimately ended up being, part of the, a good standard public realm for St Helier. So.
And going back more broadly to looking at cycling in Jersey, do you have any data on how many cyclists are in the island and predictions about how many there are going to be in the future?
It's quite a tricky one because a lot of people that cycle also drive cars as well. So when you're talking about the numbers of cyclists, it's quite a hard one to pin that on. I would like to think that most people know how to ride a bike. It's, the old saying goes, isn't it? You never forget how to ride a bike. So as long as you've been taught it once in your life, then hopefully it's something that stays with you. The government are doing some good things with the schools as well, particularly Jersey Sport. I should give a shout out to them. They're sort of fronting up the sort of bikeability training that's being sort of pushed through the schools at the moment. So I think in the schools that have got it, there's actually people going in to teach children how to ride bikes. So obviously once that's done, they're going to be, we've got a new generation of cyclists there that will hopefully, it will never leave them and they will continue to use their bikes. But I'd like to think the numbers are pretty high. I couldn't tell you the exact number though.
Do you have a data collection process, or is that coming?
We've got counters, like I said, sort of measuring the ones that are out and about cycling on the roads. We use Strava data to supplement that information. Sometimes we'll do spot counts as well. We'll go out with, you might have seen people out in the high visibility sort of coats, the orange coats, just taking clipboard surveys if we want to do a spot count sort of thing. So there's different ways we can kind of record the numbers of cyclists using a particular area. So we try and match it up with, the method we use to count them with what we're trying to do in terms of a project. So Don Road, for example, will probably end up doing more manual type collections because it's a very discrete, specific area. Whereas the ones along St Owen's Bay, for example, that I referred to earlier, they're the ones that sort of record 365 days of the year. So we've got an idea of what's going on at any given time. So it's sort of matching it up with the need, really.
In terms of people who, say, have their foot stuck to the pedal, who probably won't ever convert to cycling, are there also provisions and ideas in place for trying to convert people to EVs as well as just cycling?
So when you say electric vehicles, do you mean cars or bikes? Because there's
cars
types.
Specifically, in terms of, is there going to be an equal push for electric vehicles to come onto Jersey's roads as well as just cycling?
Yeah, I think we're going to see that identified in the carbon neutral roadmap, which is due to be published, I think, towards the end of this year. So that will identify, measures the government's likely to take around encouraging the uptake of people to electric vehicles. Just thinking about it from an industry knowledge perspective at the moment, we know that across Europe, in particular, where Jersey gets all of its cars from, pretty much every major European country has signalled an intention to get rid of the internal combustion engine by a particular date. So in the UK at the moment, that's 2030. And then you won't be able to buy hybrids, I think, after 2035. So because these countries that supply us with their vehicles have essentially instilled that policy, we're going to see a trickle-down effect in Jersey. So I'd say after those dates, you're not going to be able to buy brand new a fossil fuel powered vehicle, or it's very likely, I should say. You can never say never with these developments, but yeah.
So it's less a matter of policy regards to electric vehicles and more a case of inevitability.
It's a mixture of the two, yeah. So there's certainly a degree of inevitability because Jersey doesn't make its own cars. That said, people still might want to import classic cars, for example, that would be powered by internal combustion engines, and we wouldn't want to necessarily stop that. But by and large, generally the new vehicle fleet that comes into Jersey would become carbon neutral. There's things that we have to get right that we're going to be consulting on in the future, such as the exact date that might be relevant or applicable. Because I think the minister's been on record, the infrastructure minister, to say he's got concerns about Jersey becoming this dumping ground. That if we don't sort of match our legislation around electric vehicles to the UK's, then all of the vehicles they've got left brand new that are fossil fuel powered, they might try and offload onto a neighbouring jurisdiction. So, and that would obviously work against some of the intentions the government's got around going carbon neutral. So there's some sort of things we need to look at really to get that right, to make sure that it's suitable for Jersey. And of course we'll sort of consult with everyone near at a time as to how that's going to land. I don't think the UK themselves know at the moment just exactly how they're going to do it. There's a green paper out.
And keeping on that subject of the future, obviously the Georgetown and Don Road project is a trial. Looking ahead to the end of this trial, what will be the barometer for success? How will you be measuring the success as to whether to continue having this infrastructure in place?
So, I mean, there's lots of things we can use as barometers. I wouldn't say it's one sort of single decisive factor. Obviously, the main one's going to be, we visibly can see a number of people walking and cycling. There'll be feedback that's sort of put back to us from members of the public, and also just how the traffic overall responds to that change. Now, if we introduce it and, we find that suddenly parts of Rue de Fort, the neighbouring road, go into absolute meltdown, and it's, an unacceptable level, then, we might look at, ways that we can sort of modify the scheme to sort of, increase traffic capacity or do certain things to try and, offset that impact, really. So it's never, no one road scheme's ever, I find, generally quite finished. There's always things you can do to tweak and improve it.
And you spoke before about the overall development of the island as being something of a puzzle, I suppose, putting these pieces together. Where next? Where are the key areas you're going to be targeting? We've got here, but, what other roads, what other hotspots in particular are you going to be looking to be converting to be more cycle friendly?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been, it's kind of, we'll try and do as much as possible is the short answer, I suppose. You've probably, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but in the Bridging Island plan, the government's identified sort of the intention to further develop the Eastern Cycle Network. So that's one of the things that's going through the sort of public consultation process at the moment. So Don Road forms one key part of that. And in the future, we're going to obviously try and develop as many additional arms to that Eastern Cycle Network as possible. The West's got quite a good cycle network in terms of, like I said, the one that runs along St Albans Bay and the Railway Walk. So what we're going to do is try and sort of cross the gaps where we know there's sort of, unmet sort of supply in the cycle network. So, Georgetown in particular springs to mind. That's quite a difficult place to cycle through. So there might be some solutions we can look at there, but say this is all like future work, and I'm very much thinking of this off the top of my head. But, we'll look at the data and hopefully try and, work out where the next piece is. Because the thing with transport projects in general is that lots of people have got really quite powerful feelings as to what the government can do to sort out transport, and usually it revolves around their own personal experience. So how do I get to work? How do I get my kids to school? That sort of thing. Our sort of challenge is really to do the thing that is the most benefit to the most people whilst staying within the budget that we've got available to us. So, typically we'll try and do the things really starting in St Helier, because we know that's where the most people move around, and then sort of gravitate outwards, really, because if you can get the most people cycling and walking and using public transport in the middle of town, then that will then hopefully have a beneficial effect on traffic the further out you go. So
it's going to be sort of central outwards approach.
Yeah, like I said, because if you do things, say we're investing government money in transforming projects like Don Road, we want to make sure that we're getting the best value from it. So, if we're doing things in the middle of town, there's going to be more people using it. So there's basically more value to more people. So that's the general premise sort of thing. And also, if you think about it from a user's perspective, it can be incredibly frustrating if you've got a really amazing piece of infrastructure outside of town like we've got with the St. Peter's Valley cycle path, although that's maybe not the best example. But you find you've got a really great trip along that piece of infrastructure, and then you get to town, like the destinations where you're mostly trying to get to, and you find it just runs out. So if we can bridge those gaps and make the sort of network, particularly in St. Helier, really, really legible, really obvious, then, it'll just enhance the overall offer for cycling.
Thank you to Rob Hayward for sharing those insights, and thank you for listening to the Bailiwick Podcast. You can find the podcast on all the usual pod places, and don't forget to like and share. The music at the beginning and end of this podcast is I Shift My Weight by Luno. Tune in next week for more.